Jamie, you've done a million interviews, okay? And I'd kind of like this one to be a little bit different, maybe even different than anything I've ever done on this show. But I know you're a master storyteller. Basically, we're going to try to share the stories of your life and the learnings that you had along the way. And, I know it's going to be a lot of fun for me because I've been a part of at least a good deal of your business career. I know your father was a stockbroker, and we've talked a little bit about him, but I've never really heard you talk a lot about your mother. Could you tell us a story about your mom and a leadership lesson that you picked up from her?
Yeah. I'll do both a little bit. My parents died in 2016. And if you'd asked me before that about, credit for what you did and how you grew and stuff like that, I probably didn't talk about it a lot. But now I'm looking back and you realize that very fundamental values you have, come from them. And the values were pretty basic. And I call them Greek, but they probably were just values that a lot of, folks have. One is you do the best you can. And whatever you do the best you can. It wasn't about how you did. It was simply that did you give it your best? The second was you treat everyone well. Like, if you mistreated anyone, like a waiter or a taxi cab driver, that was unacceptable. And as a codicil to that is you didn't allow other people to be bullies, which sometimes got you in trouble a little bit. And the third is do something with your life, but it's about purpose. So my dad was a stockbroker, but he was much more interested in philosophy than being a stockbroker. And the purpose could be, so my older brother became a physicist, a real physicist, MIT, University of Chicago, Niels Bohr Institute. My twin brother became an educator, but it was doing something with purpose. Draw your Picasso and make the world a better place through that purpose. And you could be art, it could be science, it could be teaching, it could be being a parent. It wasn't anything than just do it well and have a purpose. And they were pretty strict about that. Both of them. My mom was a Spartan. And when I say that, I really mean that. I mean, she was a beautiful woman, but she was pretty tough. Like I saw her, the only time I saw her cry was when JF Kennedy got killed. And I got home that day and she was crying. Other than that, not even when we told her she had pancreatic cancer or, and she said, I've had a great life. And so she was, I would say, kind of stoic. She became very early on a women's libber. And she also went back to college when I went to college. So she hadn't finished college. She'd gone for a year or two at Brooklyn College or something like that, and then stopped to be a mother. But she always did things like, I'll tell you a quick little story about my mother. We must be 12 or 13 years old, and my parents are having a glass of wine in the living room. And my father says to my mother something about, her name was Themis, which means justice in Greek, by the way. I believe the goddess of justice. And he used the word, you're acting hysterical. And I don't know if you remember those books about the second mystique or the second sex. And she said, I told you not to say that, Ted. He said, well, when you're acting hysterical, you're acting hysterical. And she said, I told you not to say that. And he said it one more time. And she walked up to him and took her wine in his face and left the room. And he was in shock. And the three boys, we've never seen anything like that. Not in my house. And now, of course, the three of us were like, the revolution has begun because he was the boss. Like just you, and it was like we're going to overthrow the king. And to his credit, when we all sat down for dinner a little bit later, he came back and said, "I just want you all to know your mom was right." So
that sounds like the Jamie Dimon I know today.
The other thing about my mother, you got to understand, my mother was a Freudian. So my father kind of was, but my father was more like us. Like what did they do? Blah, blah, blah. But she was like, why did they do it? And so it's like, so you end up these conversations. I don't care why they did it. It's what they did. And so, but because of that, I read a lot of Freud before I finished college. I mean, I read almost all of it before I finished college, just to how people think. And of course, a lot of Freud was wrong, but it is a real insight into trying to figure out how the mind works.
Yeah. How much do you think that really helped you as you started working with people?
Quite a bit. I always try to be. I think both sides, trying to act and do something, but also try to figure out people and their motivations. There are all those EQ things you talk about. Are they real? Are they authentic? What motivates them? Why? Treating people respectfully. So yeah, I do think it helps in part of your life. You're always thinking, how the world works, but also how people work. And both, as you know, both those things can be very complicated. And we still spend most of our time trying to figure that stuff out.
How did the fact that your dad was in finance and was totally indoctrinated in that world, how did that impact, where you headed? And when you think about your dad, what was the biggest thing you learned from him that you took into the business world?
So of the three boys, I was the only one who took an interest in finance. I worked from the summer, basically like doing mailings and answering phones and stuff like that when I was 14 or 15. But I was interested. I always read the papers. I always read the business section. I read the sports section. I read the. So he nurtured that. He didn't make anyone do it. Like I said, my older brother became a physicist. My other brother, educator, which my parents enormously respected. But I was interested in that part of the world, and so he'd give me stuff to read. I remember reading a book that Merrill Lynch had done, like how to read an income statement and balance sheet. I read Graham and Dodd. There's a big, thick one, but there's a one called The Intelligent Investor. I probably read it when I was 15, and I bought my first stocks when I was about 14 or 15. And so that my interest was piqued. I wasn't heading to be a stockbroker. In fact, my father didn't want me to. His view was, a lot of people like the grass is green on the other side. He didn't think it was what I should be doing or stuff like that. And I didn't head to be a stockbroker. But yeah, of course, it nurtured my interest. And, I wrote a couple of papers in college about business and stuff like that. So I was interested. But the interest was more about building something great. I would read the stories about companies that had really done interesting stuff and built things and bought things and, made more employees and stuff like that. So yeah, it nurtured it. Gave me stuff to read. I remember a very humbling thing. He came home one day, a couple of times. You remember Yum Brands. So take a business you think you would understand, like a restaurant, and you can understand what the profits are, and that you actually eat there, as opposed to like chips, which is hard for a kid. But he would take, and back then annual reports were much shorter, and he would rip out the page that had the price, and he'd say, "Read this thing, and tell me you would pay for it." And for anyone out there, I don't care how smart you are or how good I think you are, you will be humbled by that exercise. And so it really becomes a discipline about what makes you think about things and how do you think about values
that's so cool. That's so great. And so you grow up in this rough and tumble neighborhood. You get into the street fights, and here you end up going to Harvard. Okay, I don't really see you as a Harvard guy. I know you could definitely do well there, but that had to be a different kind of place for you.
So I went to Tufts University. I was one of those deferred admit. So you're going to go, but back then you had to work for 2 years. I worked at a consulting company that doesn't exist anymore, and I did well at school, and I didn't go in very nervous like that. But my wife tells the story, because I met my wife in the second year there, as you know, that I was the guy in the class, like wearing the leather jacket, a t-shirt, and jeans. Not prep, and I hadn't gone to Harvard undergrad or Yale or Princeton or, a lot of that. But I loved it because the Socratic method, for those who don't know, you sit in a class with 80 people, you read cases, and then the real world is messy. So this is not like theory anymore. Even when they talk about capital markets, it isn't like, supply demand curves. It's like, why do things trade this way? And why do people do those things? And why do so many business ventures succeed and so many fail? But you learn that and even today, if you and I went there and sat through a good case, as your friend Andy Pearson taught, and I went there when he was there, you would learn a lot from listening to other people. And that is I still do that. You sit around the table, why, what, when, you went to other companies or things. And so I liked it. I wasn't, people were afraid of public speaking, had a hard time. People who weren't a little proficient in numbers might have had a hard time, but I kind of loved it. Made some great friends there, who I still speak to, Steve Burke.
Yeah.
My wife wasn't that happy with it. It made some people kind of nervous. But when you settle in, once you see the people, you get to know them, and they're having fun every day. It's pretty good.
So you meet your wife, Judy, at Harvard. When was that aha moment you knew that she was the one?
So she was introduced to us by a friend, Mandel, who you may actually have met at one point along the way. And she pointed it out to me, and Judy was very pretty, very smart, and I was interested, intrigued right off the bat. She had asked to meet me, and she thought I was just, I don't know, kind of cool or something like that. She talked about wearing sunglasses and T-shirts, and I really, really wear sunglasses. I'm not quite sure what she was talking about, but I called up her house. She lived with like 6 other women. One of them was the president of the finance club. I was a vice president of the finance club, and I was speaking to her about some event we were doing, and then Judy got on the phone and said, "Hey, do you want to play some tennis?" I said, "Well, sure." We hit it off right away. She says went to have a malted or shake or whatever that day. She says I made her pay, which I don't think is true. But and then she had a boyfriend, by the way, who wasn't at Harvard Business School. But we started seeing each other almost every day for dinner after that, and that was that story.
Fantastic. And how long you been married now?
Been married 43, 42 years.
What would you say are the biggest learnings you've had on how to make a marriage work for that length of time and have the success you guys have had as partners?
I mean, when you give advice in this, that you learn a lot. You just do it well, like all the time. And so I'll tell you some of the things I think we did well. First of all, we were devoted to each other and kids. So we wanted to have kids, we wanted to have a family. She had a professional career, but for anyone out there, the younger people who listen to this, that's when you have a job and kids, and you're still like 28 years old. That's when you're kind of burning the candle at both ends, and now you have a real obligations to family, your wife, your kids, and stuff like that. And I always tell people, so the lessons, and I didn't always do these right, is you need to make sure that you take care of your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, your friends, your family. It doesn't happen automatically. And you and I have seen a lot of people professionally in any profession, and maybe not in profession, they start to neglect that stuff, and it's bad. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your family. You end up getting divorced. So it takes time and it takes attention, and that's probably the most important thing. I think we never did this, but I think it's very smart for. I was working so hard that we took family vacations. My wife and I very rarely took a vacation, just the two of us, which is now like a standard thing. People now there's a name for it. I forgot the name for it is. My kids do it, and I think it's just great. Which, and then we also get the grandkids a little bit. But I think people should do that. Focus, spend time. At the end of the day, it's going to be time and quality, and so.
So you meet your wife at Harvard. You get that education that everybody craves for, and you loved every bit of it. Tell us the story of how you landed your first job out of Harvard.
When I graduated Harvard, I was going to Wall Street. Not necessarily because I want to be an investment banker, but they pay a lot and you learn a lot. And I just figured that the first couple of jobs, just learn as much as you can. And I had offers from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Lehman Brothers, which are 3 of the best. But Sandy Weil ran the firm that my father was at, and I knew him a little bit. I'd worked there in one summer when I was in college. Remember the old days of data entry? I basically did data entry for budgets. And I had written a paper on the merger of Shearson and Hayden Stone. My mother sent it to him, and he sent me a letter saying, "This is a great paper. Would you want to come talk to me?" So I went to talk to him, and he offered me a job working. He had just sold Shearson, Hayden Stone to American Express, and get a job in the investment bank. And I told him no because Goldman is basically pay me a lot more. But more important than that is you get a lot more experience. And I thought, why would I give up, great experience at Goldman and higher pay? And then he called me back. I'd become a Baker Scholar at Harvard Business School, which was important to him. He likes that kind of stature and status, which is the top 3 or 4% of the kids at the school. And he said, "You know what? I just sold the company here to American Express." He was very down to earth back then. I don't remember if you knew him way back then. Yeah. And American Express was more of a bureaucratic, company. He said, "I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I would love to have you here as my assistant. You'll learn a lot. You'll see a lot. You can always go back to Wall Street." And that really intrigued me because I'd really never seen a big corporation. I thought, he was he was very different than corporate America. Fundamentally, he's more like a Jack Welch type at the time. And I did figure, if it didn't work out, I could always go back to Wall Street or something. So, and I could tell you, my interest was in building something. It wasn't necessarily being an investment banker. And he had built Shearson, Hayden Stone. And then he had these big dreams about what might happen to the American Express. and financial services. So I took the crapshoot and joined them for a lot less pay. A lot less pay, but I didn't really care that much about that. I really cared about the experience.
Tell us a story about where you think you picked up and gleaned the biggest insight you learned from Sandy Weil. And he was iconic. He was very much like a Jack Welch.
I go to America's. He wasn't the president. He became the president shortly after that. So Sandy, he was down to earth. He worked all the time for the company. I mean, he'd have breakfast, lunch, dinner, selling, buying, hiring, recruiting. I always thinking about mergers, always what we can buy. So like a lot of the mergers we did over the next 20 years were because relationships he had built up over a long period of time. He hated the bureaucracy at American Express. And one of the things that we all learn in life is when you work at certain types of things you don't like, you also learn very good things what not to do. They were hugely bureaucratic. So they had the board, and everyone prepared for the board meeting. And then they had the pre-board prep and the pre-board prep. And it took every month. And you remember Bob Lipp, who's still doing great. I speak to him every now and then. Bob Lipp hated that stuff. A lot of the big banks had it. It was just bureaucratic, a lot of politics inside, and people didn't share information and who's up and who's down. And internally, it was less of a meritocracy, more of a who do you know and where did you go to school, at least early on. And he just hated all that stuff. In fact, Bob Lipp, of course, you may remember, when we got to Travelers, when he joined us at Commercial Credit, it was like you couldn't make a presentation to the board with a PowerPoint. Like he just said, we're not doing it. And you're not prepared. So I've never prepared a presentation for the board, ever. Not once. I've done it for big deals we did and stuff like that. And so Sandy was always hustling that stuff. Always wanted to know the facts and the BS and the bureaucracy, and was a fanatic about expenses and growing. And we bought Lehman when we were there. He's always out with the salespeople, shaking hands, doing the dinners. You have a lot of CEOs who just wouldn't do that. They're too busy to actually hang out with their own people, and so you learn all those lessons.
Do you think leadership has evolved in terms of what really makes a leader today versus in those days? And do you see a difference?
There is definitely a difference. And when you ask questions like that, I always think about what is the same and what changed. So let me just do what's the same, okay? Because I think you got to be very careful about it. Like it's totally different. I think in all these things, like Andy Pearson was one of the great CEOs of all time. He was Jack Welch before Jack Welch. But the mind power, the analytics, the detail, the repeat, the rinse, the go out to the store, the observe what's going on, to listen to people, to do it again, branch by branch, product by product, service by service. A lot of companies don't do that, and they literally, and then even politics inside a company stops, a full undressing of your own performance. Like, how are we actually doing? Why, if you're in Pizza Hut, not why is just Taco Bell maybe doing better, but why is McDonald's doing better? This company overseas doing better. And if you don't do that, it's very hard to become a great company. So I don't think that's changed. I think some companies rely too much on outside advisors and all that. Another thing that has not changed is, I'm going to say, great administration. Meaning, you look at, and you've seen it where some people who run companies, they're a hot mess. People don't know what their jobs are. Meetings don't start on time. They don't return their phone calls. They're too busy. And I've used as an example, a military example, but Ike Eisenhower, during Normandy and D-Day, 150,000 troops, 7,000 ships, hundreds of aircraft, 30,000 paratroopers, food, guns, bullets, timing, planning, and you got to run stuff. So you may not be the greatest analyst in the world, but you got to run it, and the people have to know what their jobs are and how you're doing it. And the last part's changed a bit, okay, and not for everybody, and I think it's the most important part. And you were part of this too. But when I started working, there was a lot of the pounding the table and the politics. But I think what really makes a great leader is this part, which is heart and curiosity. You use recognition. I want to explain to your listeners a little bit about how I see recognition and what I learned from you. Heart is you actually give a damn. It makes you authentic. You're not trying to be perfect. You make lots of mistakes. But they see, people know you are or they aren't, how you treat people, what you say, do you do what you say, do you follow up? And for everyone on the podcast, you've all seen the BSers out there. People, they think they're getting away with it. They generally aren't. And, people don't want to work for those people. And And you can read all these leaders, whether it's military or history or business, you earn trust and respect. You earn it by every day showing that you're going to work as hard as they do, you care as much, you're trying to do the right thing. You're not trying to be right. You're the first person to say, I made a mistake. You're the first person to share credit. You're not the first person to blame the other person, hang people high, make an example of someone unless they're doing something unethical. And curiosity is the same thing, but you're always learning. So, I used to go to some branches, some stores with you every now and the restaurants, and you're always learning. I can go to any branch at JPMorgan Chase today and sit down with the tellers. I'm going to learn something about what systems we have, what Bank of America does better. Why do we do this? Why does it take some minutes? How come we can't do this in the branch? But there's a humility to that. There's a humility to being curious and learning. And I still see here a lot of people don't want to get on the road. They don't want to go out. They don't go to a call center. Because they don't want to hear about the mistakes they're making and what they can do better from someone who is junior and doesn't have the same pressure they have. But as the only reason you have these corporate executive floors, I love what Home Depot does. For those who don't know in the podcast, Home Depot calls corporate headquarters. They don't call it global headquarters. They don't call it corporate headquarters. They call it store support center. That's why they're there, because it's a store. And in that store, you have people coming in and then, how you treat people, not just the customers, but how the employees are treated reflects to how the customers are going to be treated. So it's that whole combination of heart, curiosity, giving a damn, which makes you authentic, which is why people want to work for you. And you have much more of that today. In general in the workplace, which I think is a very good thing. A little more empathy, a little more thought. Maybe something that gets overdone, and then you always talk about recognition. But do you remember me telling you what I learned from you about what recognition really is? Recognition is really telling someone else what they did, acknowledging that you didn't do it. They did it. It's acknowledging. To recognize someone else, you have to acknowledge. You have to be curious. You have to understand that you're constantly trying to figure out what you can do better. And that the boss's job is to help everyone do the best they can. And recognition is this whole kind of part. I was never good at it early on in my career, but this whole part about the recognition that, thank you. Sending a note to an employee who's, a customer sent a great letter about her. So it's constant learning, constant recognition, and people like it. Early on in my career, when I particularly was on Wall Street, I always thought recognition meant that people would be pounding the table for more compensation. But even with investment bankers, it was not true. They actually want to be appreciated for the job they did. It made them feel better as human beings, and you're acknowledging that they did something for a client that was great. It made them feel important. It wasn't going to, it may feed their ego a little bit, but it wasn't. It's just treating people with respect. Remember, he wrote that book. Oh, great one, yeah. So the guy's trying to learn from everybody, and as he's learning and making mistakes, but that's how you do it, and it's that humility and recognition. I remember one year I decided to ask the senior investment bankers what they should get paid, and I thought it might be a terrible idea because at the end of the year you have all these terrible fights about stuff like that. And I said, don't put it in a memo. Just sit down with me. Tell me, did you have a good year? What do you think? What did you do well? What did you do well? Just verbal conversation. It's amazing that most of them were much more honest that way. They literally said, I did this, I think this, and I think my comp should be around A, B, and C. And it was when you didn't do that they came in with high demands. And so I think just showing respect to people goes a hell of a long way. Like those who watch Ted Lasso, that Ted Lasso, the beauty of that story is that Ted Lasso, he didn't know anything about soccer, but he can get them to football, get them to play as a team, get rid of the demons each one have, get them to respect each other more, get them to have fun doing it.
As you were moving up with and taking on new companies with Sandy Weil, you and Lip, Travelers, commercial credit, you were always buying these companies and then turning them around. What did you learn are the basics of a fundamental turnaround? What do you have to do?
Yeah. So if you look at what we did, we were quite successful, but it was not strategic. It was more opportunistic. So you're right. We bought companies that had nothing to do with each other sometimes. And all cultures are very different. So the first thing I did was would sit down with the management team like dinner, get to know them. What do you read? What do you look at? How do you run your joint? What reports do you have? Like, what did people, and you could see instantly that a lot of people step up right away and they want to build a great company. They tell you what's wrong. And a lot of people, they defend themselves. They They're blocked. They won't look at the numbers the right way. They look at them in the way that makes them look better, which of course is a disaster for any business. And who's open? But the first thing is walk in their shoes. So, and go to the belly of the beast. So when I remember Travelers, the insurance company, I went to go get to know all the actuaries and all the underwriters. When we bought Salomon Brothers, I put an office on the trading floor, the fixed income trading floor, the belly of the beast, right there. They were shocked. I started to go through all their trades and all their positions and take them to dinner and then start fixing it. I'm looking back, we never said we're going to do a transformation. We just sat down with the business heads and said, what do you do? What are you doing? What are we going to build? What are we going to grow? How come we're not growing the sales force? How come we're not doing this? How come this company is doing better? Should we fix the technology? Are expenses too high? Is bureaucracy slowing us down? And then just start working it, man. Just over and over and over. And of course, strategy is important, but execution often is more important. These already existing companies that usually were doing something poorly, and we got to buy them rather cheaply. And we basically fixed them. It doesn't mean we did the best in strategy. We tried to do that, but and you learn that cultures are different. You learn you should never go into another place and just impose the way you do stuff on them. Because they exist for different reasons. And there are different regulations and laws and requirements, and you're hiring different types of people. And but one thing that I learned. A lot of companies have bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is always growing. There's always politicians. They're always making it worse. And they're always waiting to see, are you going to be one of those, or the politician is going to own you? So a lot of those companies, the corporate staff try to own the bosses on the floor. Oh, we'll take care of that. Don't worry, you pretty little head. There's no reason you go to the sales conference. I remember I got to Bank One. When I found out they were having some major sales conferences, they didn't even tell me about it. I was livid. I had to go, and so you learn the cultures are quite different, and then you start working it. And then also when you build things like, if you decide that their systems are terrible in some area, you don't go in and say, your systems are terrible. How can you put it as stupid? I'm going to redo this for you and get McKinsey or someone to come in and rewrite it. You form a team inside to do it. You bring in some outside people. So by the time it's built for the stores, the restaurants, they built it. You just nurtured it. And it came out a way that everyone thought was the best way. And then you and I have learned all the tricks along the way to figure out the politicians and the BSers. It's the meeting after the meeting. It's coming in and presenting numbers in a different way than the company presents the numbers. It's backing out allocated expense when that includes rent, or basic stuff. It's the people who you can see in the room, no one will disagree with them. It's the people who, when they go on the road, and you start asking the loan officers or salespeople or branch managers, hey, what can we do better? And they're kind of twisting in their chair. They don't like the fact the branch manager is saying, well, why can't I set my own hours? Why can't I do this? And why can't I do that? And they get upset. And so you're seeing this all the time, these not good managers. Some are bad, some are political, some are just rigid. And so you learn along the way how to do all those things, how to get the numbers right, report it right, share it with all the management team. A lot of lessons I got from doing that. I used to go, literally sign checks to some of these companies. I look at every vendor thing for a month or two to see how they're spending money, and then you'd be shocked. They're buying stuff. They have no idea what they're buying. Agreeing, they're signing, okay with me, but they don't even know what it is. And meanwhile, the person responsible for it is not getting the bill. I go on and on about the things you learn by going through these.
Hey everyone, it's Kula. We'll get back to the interview in just a second. Before we do though, I have a question for you. Have you downloaded the How Leaders Lead app on your iPhone? If you haven't, take 20 seconds right now, go to the App Store, search for How Leaders Lead, and download the How Leaders Lead app. In the app, every day, you'll get a 2-minute video that'll give you a leadership insight from one of our amazing guests from our podcast to inspire you and to really get your mind in the right place before you start your workday. So go to the App Store, search How Leaders Lead, download the How Leaders Lead app, and start your day every day with 2 minutes of leadership wisdom. It'll take 20 seconds. Go to the App Store, download the app, and you'll be able to watch every day, just like me, the leadership insight from How Leaders Lead.
I've watched you in action, and you clearly have high performance standards, but you have a ton of heart. I mean, and you're right. That's why people basically do want to work with you and stay with you. And you said, as you were building, all these companies with Sandy Weil, you said he didn't really mentor you. You learned a lot by watching him and then applying what you saw to how you would go about leading. But you put a lot of heart into those businesses, and then Sandy ends up, terminating you. You get fired by the guy. And that had to be traumatic, especially when you've given so much of your heart to those companies. What sticks with you the most about that experience that you've tried to take forward in the way how you lead?
So our relationship deteriorated from 1994 to 1998. When we did Citi, he set up a thing which I vehemently disagreed with, which was, while they gave me the title president, which I didn't ask for, and he had told John Reed, Jamie's pushing me back, which I never did. I don't believe in fake titles. I was going to run the Global Investment Bank, and then they changed it to be tri-heads of the Global Investment Bank. So this is a global, complex business. I was like, tri-heads? Are you kidding me? So they had tri-heads and co-heads of almost every division reporting to co-heads, Sandy and John. So just think of the complexity of that. And I told them, this is going to destroy the company. I said, you guys, and John Reed wasn't used to being talked to like this by someone. So he liked me, but he thought I was a little too aggressive. I said, this will destroy the company. And the second we announced this, people will be digging trenches, stockpiling ammunition to see who's going to win these battles. Sandy, John, Jamie, this one, this. I said, and by the time you jokers figured out, we're going to lose a lot of good people. And I actually was the first casualty. Sandy called me up. I had 100 kids at my house recruiting, for Solomon Smith Barney. And these, we had a management meeting at 4. He said, can you come at 12? I said, no, I'm having a big buffet breakfast for these people. He said, it's important. So I go up there, I go to a room like this. Sandy and John are there, and they say they make a bunch of changes. And they listed change A, change B, and change C as we want you to resign. To which I said, okay. So I knew the game. They already talked to the board. They already lined it up. I was actually shocked about A and B. I was not shocked about C. And I should have known that, and Sandy, look, you got to ask him the motivation. That John Reed wanted to leave. I was the natural successor. So that's one of the reasons John wanted me at the company. Sandy had convinced John that if, it's more important these two guys get along. And I think a lot of people think, a lot of the board members told me, because I knew them all, a lot of them is that, that if you stayed, Sandy would have had to go, and he didn't want to go. And obviously, I think the board made a mistake, and this is where boards should do the right thing and not the thing that makes the boss happy. Lessons learned, our relationship had gone south a lot before that. I called him up after a year. He didn't call me. I called him up after a year and said, saying it's time we got together. They treated me terribly on the way out. Literally, they threw me on the street. Like, they gave me an office and then called me up right before Christmas. You got to leave the office. He said, well, why? They said, well, we're not going to give presidents of the company offices anymore. I said, yeah, but you already have 5 ex-presidents and vice chairman of the offices. They said, well, this moment going forward, not you. I said, really? And they said, yeah, and you have to leave by December 30th. Anyway, I saw Sandy a year later, and I walked in, and he wanted to do it the 4 seasons. He was nervous. I was not. I said to him, Sandy, I'm going to talk just a minute about the past. I don't think you did the right thing for Citibank, but I want you to know that I made a lot of mistakes. And whether it was 60-40 or 40-60 doesn't really matter. And I listed some of my mistakes. And some of my mistakes were lessons, forever. Like I acted, some of the things I did, I acted out of anger. I was so angry about some of the stupid things, it just flew out of me sometimes. And as you know, that almost always backfires. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. And so you learn that and you've seen this too, where some people, it's just enough isn't enough. And it's not about being proud of the beautiful thing you built. It's being about, what does it mean for you? How does it look for you? And ultimately it destroyed the company.
After you got terminated, I remember you picked up boxing. What did that do for you?
So what happened was they asked me, would you want to do press that night? And I said, yeah, but I want to do that from home. Would you want to see the press? I said, yes. I met the senior team. I wish them all the best. That night, maybe 50 or 100 people came to my home, and they said, don't tell Sandy. And it was like going to your own wake. They were toasting me. And my net worth, not my self-worth that was involved. So I never felt bad. And some people outside treated me like a leper, like stay away from this guy. And other people, like literally, I'd be running through the park. Yay, Diamond, you showed him. I was like, well, good. Got myself fired. That's what I did. But I immediately, they kicked me out right away. So all of a sudden, you're working 80 hours a week to zero. So I was like, what the hell am I going to do? So I made a list of stuff. So I bought I literally went to the bookstore and bought like 30 or 40 books. And instead of reading the paper in the morning for an hour and 15 minutes, it was 2.5. And then I made a list of those things I wanted to do. Visit my brother in Denmark. I drove cross country by myself. I had a friend doing boxing at a hole-in-the-wall gym downtown. And so I did all those things, And the only thing that was on the list I think I did not do is climb Kilimanjaro. I took my family on a long trip to Europe, luxury leisure type of trip. Took them on RV trips and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. I wasn't, as you know, I was on your board. It was fun for me.
Yeah. Well, I remember, that at that time, you agreed to go on the board. And I remember Andy Pearson, who we've talked about a little bit, he was talking about putting this board together. And he says, you got to get this young whippersnapper, Jamie Dimon to come on the board. You're going to be around for a long time. You and him will be a great team. And boy, was he right. And what'd you learn just serving on the board? Because I saw such a different business than the finance world.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I think it's great to see how someone else runs it. I love talking to CEOs. How do you run your joint? Because a lot of CEOs run it differently, and they're all good. Some are terrible, but like, how do you run it? What do you do? Where do you spend your day? How much fun do you have? And it's the same with the board. Like boards are like juries, man. They could be. I've dealt with tons of boards, and they could be bureaucratic. They could be politicized. But Andy, as you know, put together like one of the best boards of all time. Ken Langone was on the board, and Bob Ulrich from Target, who was a great company. John Weinberg would run Goldman Sachs, and Bob Holland, and he ran it. I mean, Andy was, I still would say, the best to watch of anyone I've ever seen about how he just ran the meeting. All your guys would come present and how they're doing here, and he always had a very good way of saying, "That's not exactly the way it works." I forgot how he exactly did it. But it wasn't wasted time, got right to the point, was never rude. Tough, but never rude. Always evaluating the people, how they thought about a problem, how they thought about an issue, how they attacked the problem. You guys had tons of problems when we were there. And, each one, how you attacked it. You had the GMS problem, then the distributor went bankrupt and, all these things. But you learn in life, how do people deal with problems? The board was completely open. It was a lot of fun. We went to taste your foods, and you always took us to branches, to restaurants, and you just learn how people think, and even if you don't join another board, I'm not in any other board now, I tell people it's a really good thing to see how other people do things, because I go to anything I go to where other CEOs are there, or, the business roundtable or business council or stuff that you've done, I'm taking notes when I hear someone did X. I said, that's a neat idea.
Yeah.
Why don't we do, matter of fact, at my board, I still do since we last met. So you did it every board meeting, and I've been doing it every board meeting since Bank One. I still do it today, and it was your idea, like how you, and for those on the podcast, it was telling the board, honestly, everything important since you last met, good, bad, ugly. It could be the product, the food, the tasting, the profits, the China business, an honest assessment from the CEO, like I said, the good, the bad, the ugly, and it's a great tool. I still type it out, and I still keep it. And in fact, I was speaking today about having some of the people who run the business here do it themselves since we last met, as opposed to a presentation, and so I still learn things from tons of other people, how to do things better. And
so you were on the beach, as they say in finance terms, when you didn't have the job, you come to the board, you're working on that. What process did you use, and what did you learn from it as you worked your way into the CEO job at Bank One?
I was very deliberate. Okay, so I was fired in December, but I had to negotiate out. It took me to March or April, so I decided I'm going to take the summer off, take the kids around the world, and start kind of really thinking about it in September. But I did take a lot of phone calls. I took everyone respectfully. Some were, you could call it almost insulting what they were offering me. I made sure the headhunters knew I wanted to work. The major folks out there. When I came back in September, I was always polite and responsive to everyone. I had an office. I started seeing people all the time, and I had ideas. I'm going to start my own merchant bank. I wrote up documents. I spoke to people. I started about working with people, getting partners, kind of wild in the idea. Didn't love it. I could have just been my own investor, started talking to people. I went to see Cameron Gone about what is it like. I didn't love it. I thought about just teaching or writing, fundamentally. And, I realized I was ready. I wasn't done with the big game yet. And I had a lot of offers. Some were CEO, some was, I was offered to run the global investment bank of one of the big European investment banks. And I went there to see the people in London and had dinner with a bunch of them. And after doing it, I said, there's no way I'd work for these guys. I mean, Hank Greenberg called me up at AIG, and I said, going from Sandy Weill to Hank Greenberg, you'd have to have your head examined. And Jeff Bezos, who I hit it off with in 1999, is looking for president. And he and I hit it off. I still talk to him. He's an outstanding guy. It was just a bridge too far for me. I didn't necessarily fully understand the business. I had to move the family to Seattle. I love the idea of never putting a suit on again, getting a houseboat somewhere. And there are tons of others that people actually spoke to me about, but it came down at the time to Home Depot and Bank One. And Home Depot, I love those people. I thought Bernie Marcus, Arthur Blank, I went down there, I was running with Blank and Ken Langone. I did knees bees. But when I first met them, I said, just so you guys know, because I want you to know this, until you called me, I'd never been in a Home Depot. I said, so it's not my natural habitat, merchant. And they were very much like, we don't care about that. You'll learn. We want the guy with the heart and the soul and the way they think. And I went to stores with them and stuff like that. And I actually shopped houses in Atlanta. I mean, we were taking it seriously. Looked at schools for the kids. And then Bank One was there. And Bank One, as you know, was a troubled Midwestern bank and probably would have surprised people I went to it. But it was my natural habitat. When I look at a trading book or a loan book, I mean, I wasn't used to all the business they had. Moving to Chicago was going to be hard, but I wasn't done yet. And, they offered me chairman CEO, and I decided, I put half my net worth into it at the time. I tied my shoes to it. I was going to go with the ship or not. And very much like we did with Sandy Weill back at Commercial Credit Primerica, build it, make it what you can, build something great. Don't cry over spilled milk. I still deal with a lot of CEOs who they complain about their own companies endlessly. And I always like, put your pants on. I mean, just grow up. The world was never perfect. No one ever said they're going to hand you, everything on a silver platter. Business is tough. People disappoint you, and so I decided to go for that. They made me chairman CEO. I put half my money in, moved the family. I called you up, got you on the board. I needed some fresh blood on the board.
That was a lot of fun watching what you did there. It was great, and then you turned around Bank One. It was a great success story, and JPMorgan Chase decides to come and acquire Bank One. What did you learn orchestrating that with the JPMorgan Chase CEO at the time, Bill Harrison? I mean, how'd you bring it all together?
Yeah, so Bill Harrison had been not my direct banker, but I knew him from way back. And as you know, Bill's a real quality guy, and so we did that deal at the end of in the summer of 2004. But he and I had started talking in 2002 or 2003. And I'd go see him regularly. And I told you guys on the board that there are 2 or 3 very natural mergers for us. One was Fleet, and one was JPMorgan Chase. And JPMorgan Chase fell by the wayside because it had gotten too big and they'd bought Chase. But because Bank One did better and better, and they were having some tough times, it kind of came in that target range again. And so I went to see Bill. Bill and I kept on talking. He said to me at one point, hey, I can't do a deal now. My shareholders will kill me, but it's so natural. I don't have a successor, really. Would you promise me that you will call me if you're ever going to do something? And I told him, Bill, I cannot promise that, but I understand about the industrial logic. And he and I started talking about the industrial logic to people. Now, in reality, it was called. He called it a merge of equals. We got the premium, but we also got the control. If you remember correctly, I was ordained to be the CEO literally from day one. So I wasn't the CEO from day one, but the board was going to be 50-50. And I was going to be the CEO in 2 years unless 75% of the board said no. So that meant 4 of my directors had to vote against me. And you may remember the last minute, there was a little fight at our board. You guys were at dinner at my house in Chicago. And, we had...
Oh, I was a big part of that fight, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, but some people were like, don't do the deal. You can't trust these New Yorkers.
Oh, you can't. If Jamie can't be the CEO day one, we can't do the deal. Well, that was a good reason to keep it in Chicago.
Yeah,
I mean, they were coming up with all kinds of reasons, And I said, look, if Jamie can't work with Bill Harrison for 2 years, then there's something wrong with Jamie Dimon.
That's correct.
And they said, well, you remember, I'm not going to mention his name. He said, you've never been in a boardroom, like that. You're missing something here. I said, well, I do have a hell of a lot of common sense. And, there's a big fight. But anyway, the rest is history.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And you make a judgment call in life, and that we all thought I knew I could trust Bill Harrison. And he wanted to leave. They needed a successor, and they needed someone who's going to run it. And so neither Bank One had just gone from being a terrible company to a mediocre company. JPMorgan Chase was part of it. There are a lot of deals had taken place, but it never completely performed. So in reality, but the industrial logic was perfect. 2 not great credit card companies, and credit card, enormous economy scale put together. We had a great retail system. They didn't, but they had great branches in New York. We both had middle market businesses. They had an investment bank. We didn't, but we could bring those products and services to the clients around the United States. They were global. We were not. And we just started working it. And I remember starting these, like you've had, the business reviews by business, payments, systems, ops, by country, by investment banking, middle market banking, consumer banking, credit card, and never said we're going to transform, but just went to work at making it a better company, being honest assessment, setting real targets for ourselves about what we should be performing, removing the management that was political and bureaucratic. But Bill and I spoke all the time. Like I was running most of that stuff, but he was completely supportive. In fact, there was one time that at a meeting, someone said, Jamie was very rude at this meeting we had. I was criticizing them for these insurance deals they thought they were doing to protect the company from auto warranties. And he went on and on that Jamie did this. And Bill said, excuse me, that did not happen. He said, well, you weren't there. And he said, I was in the back of the room. And he was asking you a lot of very good and smart and tough questions. And Bill was a little surprised at how deep I went into all these businesses. And at one point he said to me, are you going to do this all the time? I said, yeah. I said, pretty much I leave. And, very often, he didn't always agree with the stuff I was doing, but he said, hey, it's your company. You're going to be CEO in a couple months, whatever. But then it came to one guy that I wanted to ask leave, who I thought was a great politician, but a complete self-server, took care of his, the buddies of this, and was kind of a hatchet man for Bill himself. And I went to see Bill. I said, he's got to go. And Bill said, well, I totally disagree with you. He's been key here, blah, blah. And I went home that night and I came back in the next day and I said, Bill, we've done everything together here. I'm really uncomfortable. You completely disagree. I would feel much more comfortable if you go ask some of our other senior management people about what I said. Is he trusted? Is this? Is that? And Bill, to his credit, went out and spoke to 4 or 5 people and came back and said, you were right. And I should have known. And so we were kind of lockstep every step of the way. He did, and even since he left, which is now almost 20 years ago, he's been anything he could do to help. Yeah. And even guys like the guy who ran Dennis Weatherstone, I don't know if you knew him, who had been a former CEO of JPMorgan itself, called me up an attaboy every quarter. There's some very sweet guys there. John B. McCoy.
Yeah.
The older guy who started Bank One and literally went from one branch to whatever, 1,000. He would come see me every now and then just to say, you're doing a great job, kid.
That's great. One of the things that, being on the board and watching you in action, you establish gold standards, not within the financial industry, but also other categories that might be better at processing, or you pick whatever measure that you were going after, and you really drove those gold standards home. And you talk about working it. If somebody asked you about strategy in those days, you'd say, I don't really care about that strategy. Our strategy is always changing. The strategy changes based on what we see. But you've never been one, or maybe you've changed, you were never one back then to be talking about your 5-year plan or your 10-year, you didn't spend a lot of time on that. You spent a lot of time working the business up against gold standards. How do you think about strategy?
Yeah. So the first thing I always do, the first thing and you've seen this before, some of these big companies, they're always talking about, I call it strategery. So instead of like, are you doing a good job running your business? And remember Bob Lipp used to say about strategy, it works, just do more. Like and they had outside consultants. I got rid of all that kind of stuff. And so my first goal is just run the place well, consolidate the systems, branch by branch. Then you develop plans. They were strategies. These things work, do more of these branches, close these things down, take all the products and services of JPMorgan, like into the middle market. Like the middle market does 35% of our US domestic investment banking now. And that was a strategy. You have the engine and just get more products across this, this very costly enterprise. I got rid of lots of the company that didn't fit. And so I sold this, closed it down, but every part of the company fits and they feed each other. Private bank and middle market use the consumer branches. The investment bank is hugely benefited by the private bank and by middle market banking. Payment systems are hugely benefited by being in the consumer business and the wholesale business. And so there are these large strategies, but I didn't let people spend that much time BSing about it. Like we set the strategy and now we have a plan. So even like we started building the Chase Wealth. And you have to do this. We have a lot of skunk works going on. We always have that. So like one, which probably started when you were there, was we had these branches in the wealthiest parts of the world, but we didn't do very much money management, like wealth management. And I had wanted to do a test in White Plains, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country. And we did the test and it didn't work. And then people hear, you got to cancel that, you're wasting money. I was like, well, let's try again. Did the test, didn't work. And sometimes you have to just keep modifying it, like just keep turning the dials a little bit. Okay, that business now manages $1 trillion. Okay, and so once we got the strategy right, this was by testing. So sometimes you should kill these hobbies, and sometimes you should. But there's like 10 of those. Like how we built. We're in all 50 states now. Building branches. When we bought WAMU, which is all consumer, we put on top of that private banking, middle market, and small business. So the cost of the branch system was all of a sudden feeding lots of other businesses. So there are these big strategies, but I think the problem with strategy, when people overdo it, is they spend a lot of time making excuses for why they're not running a good business.
It's sort of like the way I would describe what you've just described is you keep working on what's working and then you work on what isn't. And it just keep evolving that as you go forward.
Yeah, I'm always very cautious when I see, we have to transform the business because you are doing that over time, but you're doing it, you have to do it at a very detailed level and a strategic level.
Yeah.
And, but in a lot of businesses, you've seen this, if you have a second-rate execution, you're in trouble. If you have a first-rate execution, you can run a pretty good business, whether or not you have a perfect strategy.
We'll be back with the rest of my conversation with Jamie Dimon in just a moment. Talking about his college days, Jamie mentioned Steve Burke, who was the chairman and CEO of NBC Universal. In Steve's episode of How Leaders Lead, he talks about the same ideals of humility and curiosity that Jamie does, including this concept I love about seeing your team as a symphony.
What we have tried to do is make sure that our executives don't have big egos and that our executives don't run around saying it's all about me or I'm indispensable or, I did this and did that. And we have a philosophy that we call symphony, which is, I don't like the word synergy. I think synergy has become almost an MBA, catchphrase. We call our effort of working together symphony. And one of the advantages our company has for someone with a good idea is if you bring a movie to us and we think it's a great movie, we will make sure that it gets supported on USA, Sci-Fi, E! Entertainment, in the Olympics. And when we identify the priorities and we go to our executives, it's non-negotiable. Everybody's going to get behind these big events. And what we found is we have 22% of all television viewing in America. When we get behind promoting a new theme park ride or the Olympics or a new movie, it works. And one of the interesting side benefits of the Symphony program, it was a message, a cultural message to everybody in the company that no individual business is more important than the company as a whole. And teams do better than individual performers. And I think one of the ways that you get really creative people to work with you and for you and bring you great ideas is if they feel like what you're going to be doing is going to be about their idea, not about you. So I'm very much on the watch for people inside our company who get too carried away with themselves and forget the reason why we're here, which is bringing great ideas to America and people.
Go back and listen to my entire conversation with Steve, episode 18, here on How Leaders Lead. You know, Jamie, you're famous for a lot of things, but you're, I think, most famous for how you navigated our country and JPMorgan Chase through the Great Recession of 2008. What was your big takeaway from all that took to really get that done?
Well, first you got to go before the crisis started, and it goes back to my upbringing and with my dad. Is I had seen markets go up and down. I remember him coming home and people's incomes went down. I remember in 1974 and then 1982, New York City was desperate. So this great Wall Street, it was desperate. Restaurants were closing, stores were closing, apartments were being sold for back maintenance. Literally, people forget that 1982. And so even way back then, when I was with Sandy Weill at Travelers, Primerica, et cetera, I used to do presentations for all the stockbrokers about how we have to be able to deal with all these ups and downs. And part of the name of the game is just continue to serve your clients, do a great job in the downs, not just in the ups. And don't over celebrate the rising tide, but be prepared for the tide going out. When I got to JPMorgan, I was very tough here about capital, liquidity, profitability, because I knew that if the shit hit the fan early on, we would have had a real problem. So before that, and then get real risk management in place. So if you talk to the folks here, they were shocked at the detail. I'd go into every position, every risk, the what ifs, how bad could it get? And I made them do stress tests that they were like, it'll never happen. I said, I don't care what happens. And it's like kind of what happened, by the way. I said, I want to know if it happens that we survive to serve our client. Because you can't tell me it's not going to happen. So risk management is much more being prepared for a whole range of outcomes and what ifs. Then the shit hit the fan. But we were ready by then. We had more liquidity, more capital, more profitability. And you may remember the risk committee, the board. At one point, I left you guys at the board. And I said, I can't even, I have to go to the risk committee. And we were going through, literally client by client and country by country and loan by loan and helping people.
We went and watched that. You actually had us come watch.
You watch the sources get made. But people say, what did you do different? Nothing other than we already had teams. We already had an army. We already had things to go. So the risk committee used to meet once a week for a couple hours, and all of a sudden it was meeting, and it was kind of more formalized, reviewing certain things. And all of a sudden it was meeting 5 times a day, every day for a year. Okay, and I mean every day, and I mean going to 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. because we had Asia, we had to be up for that, and we were on calls all the time with regulators and governments and clients but the machine was working. And then the formality, when you were there, the formality went away. It's like, hey, David, don't come up and make us a presentation about the mortgage problem in Denmark. Bring up whoever you need to describe and tell us what they want to do. And so we were making, battlefield decisions mostly to help clients, because JPMorgan was actually in quite good shape. And then you just learn how people operate under stress and strain. I mean, some people are great, and some are just children.
So, all right, and so you literally helped take the country out of this crisis. What was the single biggest, darkest moment that you had during that period, and how did you said, some people don't really know how to handle crisis. How did you personally handle it?
So the first there was Bear Stearns. So the world was rocky. Subprime was going down. Some hedge funds had problems. Quant funds were having problems. Markets were down. Bear Stearns stock had fallen from, I think it had a market cap of 20 billion to 15 billion to 10 billion, which is a real sign of a problem in a financial company. And then I got the phone call on March 13th, Thursday, 2008. I was actually having dinner with my parents at a Greek restaurant down the street here. And it was maybe 9 o'clock at night. I had to leave the restaurant because I couldn't hear. And Alan Schwartz, the CEO of Bear Stearns, said, Jamie, I need $30 billion tonight. Otherwise, we're going to go bankrupt in Asia in the morning. And I said, Alan, I don't even know how to get $30 billion, but let's have you spoke to the Secretary of Treasury? And he had. I called up literally our senior people. I said, get dressed and go to the office. And we had hundreds of people come in that night, start going through the books of Bear Stearns. And we told Hank Paulson, look, let's just get them to the weekend. That gives us, 48 hours to figure out if we could save Bear Stearns. And so we had this lifeline, which I won't go through, with the Federal Reserve about how we're going to do that. That was our idea, by the way. And now I had 1,000 people, or 2,000 coming in, doing what you call due diligence. Every loan, every asset, every real estate, HR policies, litigation. Can we handle it? What are the integration? What's going to cost? How much would we write down? And we did, probably 6 months of work in 2 days, and bought Bear Stearns that night. Signed the thing that night. That kind of thing is the moment where you're breathless. It was the same way I felt when I signed the document. It's like one signature merged Bank One and JPMorgan. So I sit in my office late at night, and I'm signing that piece of paper. And I know I'm taking an extraordinary amount of risk, which we think we can handle. And I'm also subjecting my people to a tremendous amount of work. Because people forget, it's not the deal. The press writes about the deal. It's the next day, 30 or 40,000 people are working on stuff that is brand new to them. People are going to lose their jobs. People are going to have to consolidate stuff. They're worried. They're nervous. It's, you're literally working 7 days a week. But the worst moment was, so Bear Stearns was bought, and we thought that might be saving the system. But 6 months later, Lehman didn't make it. Lehman didn't get bought. Lehman disintegrated. And that caused disruption around the world of payments and systems and money, and things shouldn't happen that way, which they did fix, by the way. But even after that, AIG, the largest insurance company, Citi, Bank America, is one after another. But the Fed finally, and we did a lot of stuff, but there was really the Fed at one point putting all these programs in place that by March of 2009, the markets were hitting all-time bottoms. But I knew we're getting near the end because the programs were going to work. And it was going to release stress in the system. Markets would stop going down. People could take a deep breath, clean up the crap from the past, but go on. And so, but that was a lot of stress. And I think I just do it the same way, which I try to, this is what I find with stress, okay? The only thing that really satisfies me when I have stress from work is to work. Like going to work, I could get depressed and really stressed out on a Saturday, but if I come to the office on a Saturday or Sunday and I start working on the problems, it immediately goes away from me because I'm doing something and stuff like that. And so, but away from that, it's just to get your sleep, get your exercise, do something that takes your mind off it for a while with some, stupid TV show or something like that. When you have little successes, even in the middle of a crisis, get the people together for a little cocktail party and thank them.
Yeah.
Little things like that to just relieve it.
And you've had so many successes. If you built, JPMorgan Chase into by far and away the number one financial institution in the world, and one of the best companies in the world. Looking back, what would you say has been your biggest disappointment at JPMorgan Chase, and what did you learn from it?
People would probably point out the whale. We lost billions of dollars in this terrible idiotic trading thing. And I was, of course, heavily criticized, legitimately. And of course, at one point, someone asked me on an analyst call, is it just a tempest in a teapot? I said, yes. But at that moment, I didn't know how bad it was. I had been told something which was not accurate. And I remember coming back late one night. I said, I want to see the actual positions, the actual what ifs, the actual stuff. Reading the stuff, and my heart stopped when I realized what we had done. And I immediately got on a call with analysts and said, we've lost $2 billion. We're going to lose more. We made it was badly managed, a bad strategy, badly reported, badly done. It's my fault, and I'm sorry. It is something that had gotten away and wasn't properly reported, which I won't go into. But I do remember, but again, I don't consider that my worst moment. It was just terrible. And I actually got all the PR people and communications people together, the manager, and said, you know what? They're going to crucify me. They're going to crucify our company. I said, forget that. We're going to lose some money. We've got clients around the world. When we wake up tomorrow, we're going to serve our clients around the world. And I remember driving in the next day. I was very early, like 6:30, when they called me up and said, Jamie, all the TV cameras are out there and all the newspapers, and go into the basement so you can avoid them. I was okay. And the closer I'm getting to the building, I'm saying, wait a second. Why? I'm not going to do that. So I got out of the car. They all come running up to me, and they say, "What are you going to do? You're going to lose your job." And I said, we're going to fix this problem. I looked up the building. I said, but I want you to know how proud I am of the 7,000 people in this building serving their clients around the world every day and the great job they do. And that's how I felt. That was like a stupid problem. It wasn't, but I've learned so many lessons, look, you've been part of it, how to run meetings and how to notice politicians. But the biggest mistakes are always the same. People. When you put the wrong people in the job, that means that it takes a while to figure it out. Bullshitters are pretty good at it. They've been bullshitting for 25 years. The people who reports them are going to be hurt. The company won't do a good job. It takes you a while to figure out to replace them. And you get better at that. You just get better at that over time. You see the pattern recognition. Are they respected? Are they treated? Are they honest? As opposed to, are they the best chest pounder and the best salesman and they work their ass off and things which may be important, but that doesn't mean they're a good leader.
So the whale was what everybody would go to. When you look at it, what was your biggest disappointment in it? The whale was an event. You knew you could get over it. Did you have one bigger than that, or was this?
Yeah, there was. I would say there's some people ones. I don't want to mention their names because I think it's very important you not shit all over people that I missed. There was one at Bank One who you might remember, and I missed it. And I remember my management team coming in, and it was late at night. They said 4 guys, which I think this is fine, but most people would allow this. 4 of them said, "Jamie, sit down." I said, "Okay." They said, "We're going to tell you something. Don't say anything. Just listen." I said, "Okay." And they proceeded to tell me how this person we'd hired running this part of the business was a bad guy, a liar, dishonest. Said things and did things, and I listened, and I didn't know, and I did, and sometimes you can't tell people. So what I said to him is, "I hear you. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Thank you for saying this to me. It's now my problem." And they were right, and then there were a couple of ones at the JPMorgan Chase where I made the decision. I hired that person in Bank One, where I made the decision. I missed it, or I took too long. And I hate it when I make a change and people say, "Thank God you did that." I always say to them, "Well, why didn't you let me know earlier?" I mean, you may be the boss, but I love reading history and I love reading some military history, and you see the same thing where there are bad generals.
Ron Daniel, who ran McKinsey, always said, "David, you said you're going to learn, and you learned this. It sounds like it's your biggest, disappointment. Is he said, the business will always run. Okay? Your results will vary, but the thing that'll disappoint you the most are the people that you put your trust in. So I think that's basically what you're saying here. I know many people have asked you to run for president. I even told you once, I remember we having dinner at some Greek restaurant. I said, I will quit whatever I'm doing right now. I'll be your campaign manager. I'll do whatever you want, but we need you to run for president. What have you learned about yourself that's kept you from jumping into that briar patch?
I'm not sure I learned a lot about myself, but I do think there are skills that people have that in business world that may translate to the political world. But I think it's a mistake to automatically think that's true. So I think working hard, being authentic, having leadership skills is true. But there are also these political skills, and you've seen a lot of business people run that fail immediately. And I may be better than them, but I still doesn't have all those political skills. That's one. The second is I literally think you should kind of have a warm up before you go for president. And a warm up, could be Congress or Senate or governor. You've seen people learn those skills before you go for the big enchilada. I know the world from this position I have, so I think that's important. But I would have had to have started earlier. And I also have this unbelievable, unlike some other people, I have this unbelievable job. I think my country's right next to my family is my country. And this company, I'm just so proud of what it does for 80,000 Americans, 6,000 American companies around the world. Our markets, cities, schools, states, hospitals, the community outreach program. I'm damn proud of it. So I think I add a lot here. I'd be giving it up for kind of a wild goose chase. I tell people, had I run and won, when I was walking into that White House, I'd be waving goodbye to my family for 4 years. They'd be saying, "See you, Dad." I'm not sure. I'm not sure my wife would have gone with me there. And so I just, and it is subjecting your family to some very tough stuff. And some people are prepared for that. I was unprepared for it at the time, and so I would never rule it out. I mean, I don't like making promises. People are like, "Are you promise?" I'm not making any promise to anyone. If I change my mind, I change my mind. But I think it's hard. I'm 68 years old. As you know, I've had a health problem or two. So when you put it together, it just didn't seem like the right thing for me to do.
And you've traveled the world, and JPMorgan Chase has such global impact, as you mentioned. And as you've met global leaders, and you've met the top leaders in the world, who, if you had to pick out one person, who's impressed you the most and why?
There are several. I mean, several are terrible, and I'm not going to give you their names. And these may surprise you a little bit. Macron, very smart, very tough, says the same things publicly as privately. Very complicated politics. You could say he made some right decisions, wrong decisions. Has the right vision for France. Getting entrepreneurs, business growing, stuff like that. The guy, Greece was a basket case. The guy who runs Greece, Mitsotakis, has done an unbelievable job. And he would tell you, basically I figured out what policies we needed, and then I did the politics, whereas most politicians do it their way around. It's all about politics, and they try to fit the policies into what they promised, which, policies badly done don't work. And so, and then a lot of them from history. I've been reading a lot about Ike Eisenhower, just the competence of the man. He surrounds himself with great people. Everyone spoke up. There was no game plan. He got rid of all the policies. He was able to deal with all the complexities. And George Marshall. So I get a lot of inspiration from people not just existing. Ulysses S. Grant. They write him up as a drunkard. He was extraordinary. But as president, at one point the Ku Klux Klan comes back in, I think it was Mississippi, and you see this guy, the principled ethics. He said the black people, they weren't called blacks at the time, are citizens of this country, and they're going to be treated with all the same rights as everybody else. And he sent, I think it was Sherman or Sheridan down with troops to remove the governor. There was no prevaricating. There's no game plan. There's no if it's bad. It was terrible politics for if you wanted to win the southern states. And so there are a lot of people, Abe Lincoln, Nelson Mandela, that you just learn from watching what they do and how they handled difficult situations, difficult people.
As you think about, the situation that the world faces today, it's very complicated. It's a very scary world we live in today. Describe the world you see 5 to 10 years from now. You think we're going to be in this for a long, long time, or the China relationship? How do you see the world? And there was a time when the global economy was everything, and China needed us, and we needed China. Everything seems to be on very shifting sand. How do you look at it, and how should we think about it?
It is really complex, and I think the way I look at it is it's Russia-Ukraine war. It's the aiding and abetting of Iran and North Korea of what's happening in Ukraine. It's Iran's nuclear program. It's the terrorism in the Middle East against Israel. And then China's part in that. Kind of not with it, they're not part of that evil part, but they're aiding and abetting it with microelectronics and buying oil and gas and all these various things. It's dangerous. And you're talking about, this is not the economy I'm worried about. This is the future of freedom and democracy in the world. And the only way to deal with something like this, if you read history, is deal with it. Don't just pray it goes away. It may not go away. When this war started, I told people that's almost on 3 years. You're talking about Iran being very close to have a nuclear weapon. China is trying to divide the Western world by quite openly. They're saying it, we don't want the American system to prevail, and we don't want the reserve currency, and we want every country not to be part of the American economic system. And I think the public should understand that the military alliance we have and the economic alliances are very deeply related. And our national power is based upon our moral power, our economic power, in addition to our military power. And the moral power is still real. We have the greatest country on the planet, the freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of enterprise. Those freedoms, if you took down our barriers, the immigration, 4 billion people move here because they want those freedoms. And then they'd invent companies. And I think Americans underestimate the power of that. Yes, we've had flaws of a country, and we should focus on some of that, but we shouldn't denigrate this is a shining light, a shining city on the hill. And so to conquer these things, you need to make sure America stays strong. So America, when I talk about China, we have all the food, war, and energy we need. We have peace in North America and South America. We got the Atlantic and the Pacific. In China, our GDP per person is $80,000. Theirs is 15. They import 10 million barrels of oil a day. They've got terrible demographics. And their neighborhood is a very complicated area. They're surrounded by people who've been enemies in the past, and they're pissing them all off. Not because anything America's done, by the way, but the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Korea, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Russia. It's a tough part of the world, and they're kind of hemmed in. And so we have the better hand. The question to me I worry about is we need to play that hand. There's no, if only American leadership can keep the world free and safe for democracy. Only American leadership. And we've got to keep together the military and the economic alliance, because the economic battlefield, and these are directly related, is about national security. Like, where do we get our penicillin from, and where do we get our graphite from, and where do we get our rare earths from, and stuff like that. But it's also about unfair economic competition, because that becomes beggar thy neighbor. And you have Europe in a very tough spot now because they have very high energy costs. We have very low energy costs, so it makes it very hard for the industry. And then China is, can sink their car companies. So you have a very complex situation. So my view is build America. Start with our own civics. We owe our country, why it's so important, what freedom and democracy are about, build our economy, and at the economic power is the root of all those things. It allows you to do all the other things, and then have a very sophisticated role about how we're going to maintain American leadership, but for America. We're not doing it, out of just the goodness of our hearts. And I also think it needs to be more realpolitik. We lecture I go all around the world as you did, and we're constantly lecturing people about their labor laws and their climate and their all these things. And I'm not against furthering human rights, but it should be subordinated. So it needs to be subordinated to national security interests and realpolitik. There's that great quote when Stalin was telling FDR and Churchill at Yalta, I think, or Potsdam, I think it was Yalta, that he wanted to do something. And FDR said, "Mr. President, the Pope wouldn't agree with that." And Stalin leaned forward and said, "Exactly how many divisions does the Pope have?" And that's the game we're in. And we do these dumbest things in the name of good that actually make us weaker and make our allies weaker. And so we have to be very thoughtful. And I'll be reaching out to the new administration on that. We reached out to the old administration. We've hired national security experts to help our clients. And then, a little bit of a mea culpa. We all made a mistake, and it should be acknowledged. This is something we have to whip ourselves about. All of us should have been a little more thoughtful about China going back about 10 years. And, at one point they entered WTO in 2000, but they were starting to abuse it by 2012, and we should have been more thoughtful then. They were really thinking it through, and we were just kind of happy-go-lucky. All of us, and so was the government, but now's the time to say, okay, no, they can't be mercantilists. They can't, beggar thy neighbor economically. They can't do certain things they're doing. We have the better hands. I'm not telling Americans, worry about it. I'm saying let's just make sure we build a really strong company. Let's make sure we have unparalleled military strength that is unquestioned, because the best way to avoid a war is to be strong. I can borrow other things. So, So I just think we got to fight for that America and remind ourselves and educate our kids and educate people why it's important, educate people what the interlinks between those things.
It's, we've covered a lot of fronts here, and it's been fun, having this conversation. I want to have some more with my lightning round of questions. And are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
3 words that best describe you.
Tenacious, relentless. Tenacious and relentless. I love to learn all the time.
If you could be one person for a day besides yourself, who would it be?
Abe Lincoln.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Bureaucracy.
Who would play you in a movie?
Well, my wife would want Harrison Ford or George Clooney, but they are obviously better looking than I am.
What's a Greek delicacy everyone should try?
Moussaka.
The last time you put on boxing gloves and punched someone?
Oh, God. That was 15 years ago.
Your favorite memory from the U.S. Open tennis tournament?
Opening a business week one day and seeing Steffi Graf serving in a picture, and then I looked really closely at what was behind her, and I could see my little daughter, who's 8 years old, looking at her. That was probably the best moment for me. And my granddaughters have been, those big what they call teletrons, whatever. They've been on that a couple of times when they're watching I try to take them every year.
What's the one thing you do just for you?
Read history.
Your most prized possession?
My family.
If I turned the radio on in your car, what would I hear?
Just music, just general music.
What's something about you few people would know?
I'm actually a pushover, and I'm actually quite easy. And
I think that might be just a little bit of a stretch.
If you ask all my family members who's the easiest one when it comes to where you eat, where you travel, what you do, when you get up, they would say Dad. I just want to do whatever makes me happy.
What's one of your daily rituals, something that you never miss?
Reading the papers in the morning.
All right, well, we're out of the lightning round, and I just got a few more questions, and we'll wrap this up, okay? I got to ask you, tell us the story of what it was like when you had your first child.
Well, that's, I think for everyone, that's like an unforgettable experience. And I remember my wife had some complications with that, so it was a cesarean. So she came out looking good. But I remember holding her, my little daughter, with a little teeny rib cage, and then she stretched, and just holding this little stretching baby. And then she yawned and hiccuped, which, she did quite a bit. And like holding a new life in your hands is extraordinary.
You now have this incredible family with 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren, and you've now got a 2-year-old grandson. You have all these daughters. And what was it like when you finally got the grandson?
Well, first of all, I have 2 wonderful son-in-laws. And you have a daughter. You probably worried like I did earlier, like, what if you don't like the son-in-laws? Like, what if they get married and you don't? I adore these kids. They're both wonderful fathers and husbands and son-in-laws, and they're delightful to be with. We all travel together. We like their families. So we're like one happy-go-lucky. When we finally found out there was a boy, I mean, it's hard even to contemplate it for us because I never had a baby boy. And so, but he's quite, I put him in quite a pampered category. All 6 of the other kids, will pick him up and carry him around and play with them. And I don't think he has any idea what he's going to have to learn to grow up with. I mean, I can imagine all those girls, whenever he brings home a girlfriend eventually, they're going to all want to vet the girlfriend.
I bet so. You and I both had our health issues, and you've struggled with cancer, and how is that? How much did that really change you, or did it?
It did, and I think it changed me over time. I don't think you realize immediately what it does, but as you know, when someone says you have cancer, your life changes. And I tell a lot of people, everyone knows they're going to die. But that when they say it, all of a sudden it's like in your face. And you have to contemplate dying all the time until even now, you're a survivor, but all the time until they say you're in remission. And of course, radiation and chemo can be absolutely devastating. And I remember I wouldn't go tell my parents. I told my wife, you have to tell them, because I didn't want to tell my parents I may die before them. And so the thing that changed is it does make you live a little more deliberately about how you run your life and what you do and how you spend your time. It wasn't like I was going to change. I love working. I love my country. It didn't change that, but it did change how you deal with certain people and certain issues. And I think because of that, when I had the second health issue, I was being wheeled into the surgery, and I knew it was maybe not even 50-50 I would survive, that I didn't have any regrets. Because the ones I might have had, I actually fixed the first time around.
A mutual friend of ours, it's the late head of Goldman Sachs, John Weinberg. He had this line, which I love. He said, you either grow or you swell. How do you manage not getting a big head? I mean, just think of what you run and everything you've accomplished. And
this is my belief, because I always quote him too in that, because that when people get the big job, it's shocking sometimes how they act. And all of us who get the big job is actually creates more humility, because how little you know about certain things, and yet you're responsible for them. But other people, I think what it is, it's how you're grounded. And that grounding comes from your whole life experience. But it's the insecurity. It's the insecure people who, when they get that big job, it makes them so insecure that the way they fix it is by controlling the meetings, by having friends of Bill, by having friends of this, by everyone knows this is what they want. And they never want to be embarrassed. They never want to look bad. They're the ones who won't go in the on some of these trips because they're afraid of, being criticized. And you see these traits. And you see them and that doesn't have to be the CEO of a company. It could be the CEO of a division. And other people, there's none of that. I tell people, and you know how insecure your listeners may not understand that when you run a company, so make believe I'm running a trading desk that does mortgages. And if I want to do mortgages, I have to call that guy and say, he knows more about than I know or anybody else. I say, hey, what about this? What about that? Why don't we do this? But maybe he gets promoted. And now he's running 6 divisions, mortgages and credit and equities and stuff like that. Well, all of a sudden he's an expert in 1 and he's learning 5. And then he gets promoted again. Okay, now he's an expert in 6 and he's learning 30. And so the higher you get, the more insecurity it breeds, which is why I think that some people, they turn inward, they get scared, they block it, they cover up their anxiety. And other people, they're more like, they realize they don't know all that stuff and they reach out for help. And they have that curiosity and recognition and all those things we talk about, heart and curiosity. But I think it's how you're grounded. I don't think it's just, it happens.
Yeah. One of the things about you, Jamie, is you've been in position for a long time at JPMorgan Chase. And, many would call you like the John Wooden of financial expertise, coaching, whatever. I mean, you are the John Wooden. I mean, and, it was very difficult when John Wooden retired to ever replace John Wooden. I mean, how do you think about replacing yourself? And do you give yourself high marks on your process that you have for that?
Yes, so far, obviously the decision is the most important, but the board's fully engaged. That my board knows everybody. They see them freely. They take them out. So there's no blockage of those folks. We have the same list everyone has about, all the skills you need and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I put character and culture as that's a sine qua non. Heart, curiosity, work at drive, grit. You better have a little bit of grit. It's this basket of things that make up a human being. It's not one thing. And we have people with great skills across the board. And I think the board believes that, and I believe that. I took the board through successful succession planning, unsuccessful succession planning. So what worked and what didn't work. Several people on my board have been through it. So they've told the board how they approach and stuff like that. So we're doing it pretty systemically. And we think we've got people who've got that full, broad range of capabilities. I don't like it when someone says, what are you looking for? A technologist or a marketing person? No. You're looking for that whole set of stuff. That they carry the culture, they got the energy, they bring people with them. They don't have to be perfect at any one thing, but they have to have that spectrum of stuff where people actually want to work at the company. They get the best out of the other people, and I think we have many people who can do that.
Last question here. If you could give one piece of advice to any leader, what would it be?
I would go back to make sure you have heart and curiosity and give a damn and understand that you don't know it all and you're not even the expert anymore.
Jamie, I want to thank you for all this time, and I want to thank you for your friendship. You're always there. You're always there. I mean, we don't get together all the time, but when we do, we pick up from where we last left each other. And, last year, my wife passed away, and in February, you and Judy were there. And you're there for people when they need them most. And I thank you for being that kind of friend for me. You're an amazing guy, and I'm blessed to have you as a friend.
Well, David, you've always been there for me also, and both you and I love you, and it's great spending some time with you.